September 12, 1952, Eugene Lemon raised a flashlight toward two bright points beside a tree on a hill above Flatwoods, West Virginia, and for a few seconds the beam caught something nobody around him could identify. According to later witness accounts, the figure had a round reddish face, a pointed hood-like outline, dark folds below, and a height that changed whenever the story was retold. Lemon had only moments to look before Kathleen May and several boys reacted and ran, while Richie, a dog that had accompanied the group, was somewhere on the slope. Earlier that evening, those boys had watched a brilliant object cross the sky and appear to descend beyond the hills, so the search party was already expecting to find something unusual before Lemon raised the flashlight. Elsewhere across Maryland, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, witnesses were reporting the brilliant meteor as it crossed the evening sky, long before anyone on Fisher's Hill knew what Lemon's flashlight would eventually find. Around 7:15, Edward and Freddie May, Tommy Heyer, and other boys saw the object move overhead and believed it had come down near Farmer Bailey Fisher's property, so they hurried home. Kathleen May did not wait for daylight, while Eugene Lemon joined her with several children and Richie as the group climbed toward where the boys thought the object had fallen. Ahead of them, a reddish light seemed to pulse through the darkness, giving the search party a destination when almost everything else remained uncertain. Then, Lemon noticed what looked like a pair of shining eyes near a tree and raised his flashlight. Within seconds, the group was looking at a shape that later accounts would transform into one of the most recognizable monsters in American folklore, although no camera captured it and nobody measured its distance or size. One contemporary report put the figure at 11 or 12 feet tall, while another reported estimates ranging from about 7 feet to 17. Before the weekend was over, something seen in poor light already had a face, claws, a body, and a way of moving on paper. Quick interruption: if you enjoy investigations that let the strange evidence breathe before trying to kill the mystery, like the video, subscribe, and support the channel. Having briefly appeased the algorithm, we can return to Flatwoods and the people who had to decide what they had actually seen. Reporter Lee Stewart Jr. reached the witnesses soon after the encounter and found people who, by his later account, did not behave like a group calmly polishing a story for attention. Contemporary reporting describes Lemon as so shaken after returning from the hill that smelling salts were used, and Stewart later said that the 17-year-old was still trembling the following morning when he was coaxed back toward the site. Daylight revealed no creature, no wrecked machine, and no obvious piece of technology waiting in the field, but the ground was not completely empty either. Searchers had crossed the area, visitors had begun arriving, and Stewart reported trampled grass, a strange odor, and marks that looked like skids or parallel depressions. Across the meadow, two parallel marks cut through the grass, while later accounts also mentioned an oily or gummy substance nearby, giving reporters something physical to examine after a night built almost entirely from testimony. Nearly 50 years afterward, investigator Joe Nickell returned to Flatwoods and spoke with local resident Max Lockhart, who offered a much less exotic possibility. Lockhart told Nickell that on the night of the excitement he had driven his black 1942 Chevrolet pickup up the hillside, left the road, and circled through the field while looking for whatever people said had landed there. Suddenly, the marks had a possible driver, and the oily substance had a possible source, although neither conclusion could be proven forensically decades after the fact. Convinced by Lockhart's account, Nickell believed the truck probably created the traces, but the gap of almost half a century means that reconstruction has to remain a plausible explanation, rather than a laboratory result. Ray Barker arrived roughly a week after the incident, by which time rain, foot traffic, and curiosity had already compromised whatever condition the hillside originally had. Whatever evidence might once have been clean enough to examine was now mixed with the ordinary consequences of people showing up after a monster story had begun circulating. Only 3 days after the original encounter, on September 15th, while Lemon was still being described as badly shaken, Stewart was already telling United Press that an owl sitting in a tree might account for what the group had seen. In that account, he suggested that twilight, vegetation, uncertain scale, and a perched bird could have produced the impression of a much larger figure. Even while raising that possibility, Stewart continued to insist that the witnesses were genuinely frightened and that they had seen something. Returning to the beginning of the night, the first thing that needs to be separated from the monster is the object in the sky. Astronomers and witnesses well beyond Flatwoods reported a brilliant meteor that evening, and reporting associated with the Maryland Academy of Sciences placed it over Baltimore around 7 o'clock, moving generally toward West Virginia. Other observers across Maryland, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia watched the same fireball move through the evening sky, while no comparable photograph, measurement, or physical record would ever capture the figure reported later on Fisher's Hill. Seen from the ground, a meteor disappearing behind a ridge can look as though it has landed nearby, even when the object is still many miles away. Roughly 10 miles southwest of Flatwoods, another observer reportedly mistook the same display for an aircraft crashing in flames, which was convincing enough to send authorities searching for wreckage that was never found. Crucially, the fireball itself was real, while distance could easily have created the illusion that something enormous had fallen close to town. After leaving that meteor where it belongs, disappearing beyond the horizon, the reddish light reported farther up Fisher's Hill becomes a separate problem. Witness accounts describe that glow as pulsing or changing intensity, yet nobody photographed it, measured its distance, or recovered any source connected to it. Ivan Sanderson, a paranormal investigator who later examined the area, acknowledged that 3 aircraft beacons were visible from the hilltop, while a local teacher also pointed to a nearby beacon as a possible source. Through trees, haze, and darkness, a distant warning light can appear to brighten, dim, disappear, and reappear as people move, creating the impression that the light itself is changing. Nothing recovered from the hill physically joined that red glow to the meteor, and nothing physically joined either one to the eyes lemon illuminated beside the tree. All 3 observations had happened within minutes of one another, and by the next morning they were already being treated as parts of one encounter. April of 1952 had already put flying saucers into Life magazine, while July placed unexplained radar reports over Washington, D.C. into national headlines and gave the public another summer of speculation about unknown objects in American airspace. March had also brought Project Blue Book into existence, with the Air Force collecting and evaluating UFO reports, while newspapers, magazines, and conversations across America kept flying saucers firmly in public view. By the time the boys ran home saying something had fallen near Flatwoods, nobody climbing Fisher's Hill needed to invent a name for what might be waiting there. As the group moved through the hillside, several accounts describe a pungent, metallic, sulfur-like, or simply sickening smell hanging around the area, followed later by reports of nausea and throat irritation. Among those reports, Lemon was often described as the most affected person in the group. No surviving medical documentation available for the case establishes exposure to radiation, poison gas, spacecraft exhaust, or an unknown chemical, while Sanderson noticed strong-smelling vegetation in the area and thought a common grass might explain much of the odor. Separately, Cahill wrote that fog was settling over the hillside when the sheriff arrived, which offers an ordinary source for at least part of the reported mist. Fear and exertion can produce nausea on their own, while damp air and foul vegetation can make a hillside feel hostile, without requiring anything extraterrestrial. Those possibilities cannot tell us exactly what each witness smelled, or why every person reacted the way they did, leaving that part of the night without a clean laboratory answer. Back beside the tree, the famous drawing has to disappear for a moment, leaving only what the witnesses could actually make out during those few seconds inside Lemon's flashlight beam shining eyes, a rounded reddish face, a dark or pointed outline, possible claws, a harsh hiss or high cry, and movement later described as gliding, bobbing, or coming toward the group. May reportedly first thought the eyes might belong to an opossum or raccoon, but once Lemon raised the flashlight, the witnesses described something far larger beside the tree. Descriptions below the face were much less stable, and Gray Barker himself later noted that the area below the waist was vague. Claw-like hands appear in some versions, while others do not agree that arms were clearly visible at all. Comparing the different accounts leaves an imperfect picture, yet the flashlight keeps returning us to a pale rounded face near a tree, possible claw-like shapes, a harsh sound, and movement that several retellings describe as gliding away from the perch. Joe Nickell's later candidate was a barn owl, which is a much less glamorous suspect than an extraterrestrial visitor, but one that fits an uncomfortable number of reported details. Barn owls have pale, heart-shaped facial discs, prominent talons, harsh hisses and screams, and flight that can shift into a smooth glide when they leave a perch. Their bodies are obviously nowhere near 10 feet tall, yet uncertain distance at night can merge a perched bird with a tree trunk, brush, shadow, and whatever vegetation lies underneath it. Nickell also speculated that a female owl might have been defending young, which could explain why it stayed nearby until the flashlight hit it, although that part of the reconstruction remains speculation rather than evidence. Investigators documented no nest at the exact location, collected no feather, photographed no owl on that branch, and tied no captured bird to the encounter. Put a barn owl on a branch above dark vegetation, catch its pale face and reflective eyes in a flashlight, expose its talons for only a moment, then have it hiss and glide from the perch, and several of the monster's strangest features appear without adding anything that did not already belong on a West Virginia hillside. A week after Lemon's flashlight caught something beside a tree, Kathleen May, Eugene Lemon, and Lee Stewart were in New York for the television program We the People, carrying a few seconds of confusion from a West Virginia hillside onto a national stage. While they were there, an artist worked from May's description and gave clean lines to a figure nobody had photographed, turning a reddish face, a hood-like outline, and an uncertain lower body into a single image that viewers could actually recognize. Once that drawing reached newspapers and television, the creature no longer changed every time somebody tried to imagine it, because Flatwoods now had a monster with a permanent face. During 1952, the Air Force was already collecting UFO reports under Project Blue Book, and surviving records establish that the program was active during the same year Flatwoods entered the national conversation. Cahill's later account says unnamed Air Force intelligence sources told him that investigators considered the sky object a meteor and the creature probably a large owl. Archival records clearly establish Blue Book, while the specific Flatwoods intelligence story comes through Cahill, and the surviving public record does not clearly show the dramatic field investigation that later versions sometimes describe. Return to 7:15 that evening, but this time leave each light, sound and movement exactly where the witnesses encountered it, instead of assuming they all came from the same thing. Close to 7:15, a meteor burns across the sky and disappears beyond the ridge, while the boys watching it conclude that something has fallen nearby. Minutes later, they return with Kathleen May, Eugene Lemon, the other children, and Richie, and the group begins climbing toward the place where they think the object came down. Somewhere ahead, a separate red light flashes or pulses through the darkness, giving the search party a destination before anyone knows what the source is. Farther along the slope, Lemon notices shining eyes near a tree and raises his flashlight, revealing a shape that the witnesses cannot immediately identify. Moments afterward, a harsh sound follows, something seems to move, and the entire group runs before anyone gets a second look under calm conditions. Come daylight, tracks and an odor become part of the evidence, while visitors' vehicles, rain and curiosity are already changing the hillside. Only days later, newspapers have a monster, a New York artist has given it a face, and national television has turned those few seconds into an image audiences can recognize. By then, the meteor has disappeared beyond the ridge, the possible beacon still flashes beyond the trees. Lockhart's truck has crossed the meadow, and the owl hypothesis has reached the branch beside Lemon's flashlight beam. What never survived the night was a photograph, recording, measurement, feather, or physical object capable of identifying exactly what the witnesses saw. For only a few seconds, Eugene Lemon and the people around him saw something beside a tree, reacted to it, and ran before the encounter could become evidence that anyone could examine later. Maybe the flashlight caught a barn owl, perched above foliage at exactly the wrong angle on exactly the wrong night, while fear and expectation turned an ordinary animal into something enormous. Perhaps some details shifted during retelling, while others remained because the witnesses were describing a real experience they never understood. 74 years later, the meteor still belongs in the sky. The beacons still belong beyond the trees, the Chevrolet still belongs in the meadow, and the owl still fits surprisingly well on that branch. Yet Lemon's flashlight lasted only seconds, and whatever stood inside that beam disappeared with the moment, before anyone could photograph it, measure it, collect it, or return for another look. Conceivably, a bird ruined West Virginia's entire week, although the exact thing those witnesses saw beside that tree remains beyond recovery. Certainty is what Fisher's Hill never gave back. Thanks for watching, and keep asking what the evidence actually earns.